Hi, hello. Welcome to my channel. I'm Sophie. Today I'm going to talk about my favorite books of all time. This is a daunting adventure, so let's see how I do.
Bibliosophie.
Okay, so this one is definitely overwhelming for me for a number of reasons. One, I have a really hard time picking favorites. I think a lot of people do. I think I'm maybe worse than most people, but I know that I'm not special. It's hard to commit to saying, this is my favorite. But favorites can change. You understand, I understand, everybody understands that these are imperfect favorites. I have 10 books for you today. They are all novels, so I've attempted to make the process of picking favorites a little bit easier on myself by imposing a couple of strictures. I didn't want to get into nonfiction. That seemed absolutely impossible. What are the things that have really shaped me? I couldn't. It was too much. Maybe one of these days I will do one of those videos, but novels seemed a little bit more approachable. So just fiction today, novels. 10, which limits me and just kind of gives me an aleatoric number of, oh, no, sorry, couldn't include that one because I can only include 10 books. So these are kind of my safety nets for myself. And as I said, these are partially representative of books beyond just themselves. They are sometimes kind of representative of an entire author's oeuvre. And I'll change my mind. That'll be good content. Maybe in a year, if I'm still doing this, I'm gonna do an updated list. Do I still stand by my, quote, top 10 books of all time? So even though for pithiness and shortening of title and thumbnail reasons, I think I'm going to call this video my favorite books of all time, or my favorite 10 books of all time, or some such thing along those lines. We are entering into a pact that assumes, rather, that these are 10 books that I really, really love that are representative of other books that I also really love and are an incomplete and imperfect list of my novel predilections. All right, that is my very long-winded disclaimer that I felt like I needed to have for you. I cut my bangs a little bit this morning with nail scissors, and yeah, that's what I did. The list. I'm gonna give these to you in chronological order because it seemed like the simplest way to do so. We're gonna run into a little bit of an impediment for one of the books in terms of publishing date, so chronological order is not quite as clear as it could be, but generally it's kind of the easiest way to go about things. Yeah, the reason why this video is daunting is that I have to recall the plots of 10 books and try to tell you in short form what those plots are as best I can in a compelling way, which is hard. So our first book is going to be L'éducation sentimentale, Sentimental Education by Gustave Flaubert. This is a huge classic. A lot of these books are not tremendously inventive favorites. You're going to see a lot of really big classics in this list. But, you know, call me unimaginative if you want. This one is about a young student, law student named Frédéric, who becomes completely obsessed with an older woman, the wife of a publisher, and his kind of continued obsession with her, as well as his amorous education. It's his coming of age through love and sentiment. this is really an early modern narrative that excels in character study and detail and description of detail, description of society and social satire, personal narrative versus social narrative, chronology and time. Yeah, it's a hot hit, and if you like classics, this is one that feels really, really modern. It's one of the kind of quintessential early, very modern narratives that uses language and form in a way that is understandable, I think, to modern audiences, and with a lot of realism, by the way, I should say. So it's very much commentary both on the micro and the macro at once. Okay, I think that was a pretty good description of our first book. Our second book is another French classic. The first two are going to be big French classics, and that is Du côté, chez, Swann, Swans Way in English. This is by Marcel Proust. This is the first of À la recherche du temps perdu, A Remembrance of Things Past. Yes, I believe is the title in English. His magnum opus. So this is the one that's famous for starting with the Madeleine that sets off his recollection of his past, of his childhood. And it's a series of descriptions of his childhood, of our narrator's childhood, of people and instances in minute detail often. And it's really, really an exploration of time, memory, sense, psychology, and relationship, and the relationship of present self through the layers of time. So another huge classic that you've probably heard of, but it's a banger. I have never finished the full Recherche du temps perdu. That's one of these days I would like to actually read all of the volumes. I've only read the first two. I'd like to reread them because it's been a while, but I'd like to, be a completionist at some point of that. Next up is Borges, Jorge Luis Borges with Ficciones. This is the only short story collection that I'm talking about in this list. It is, I have forgotten how many short stories there are in the collection, but they really rewired my brain when I read them. I think I was maybe 18 when I read them, and they really left an impression on me. A lot of the stories relate to, there's a labyrinth. There's this like recurrent trope or theme of labyrinths, language, secret societies and conspiracies, writing and memory. So you're gonna see a lot of recurring patterns in my favorites. There's a lot of fiction that revolves around sifting through knowledge. And these are really about a search. They're all kind of an archaeology for the past, for ancestry, for hidden societies, hidden knowledge, hidden words, how certain words and works are created. And so that's definitely a through line in my choices, like a self in relation to seeking out experience on the outside and on the inside is going to be, I think you're going to see a major through line. Next up is Catalin Street by Magda, Szabó. This is an example of me choosing not completely at random, but slightly randomly, one of Szabó's books, because I really have loved all of the books of hers that I have read. The one I read most recently is Catalin Street, so that might be why it is maybe my favorite, but also it's a really gorgeous distillation of her themes of relations between different people and the relationship that people have also to time and place. This is a novel that takes place over a fair amount of Hungarian history in Budapest, in which, and it follows three families who are all centered around Catalin Street. They are all neighbors on that street, and the adults and the children of these three families have different relationships to one another and grow up together. But the fact of history, the inescapable fact of history and World War II comes to really, really disrupt those three families' lives, and how history impacts those three families and the individuals within those three families is then kind of branching out over the course of the novel. It's a ghost story, both symbolically and even literally. It made me cry. It is really gorgeous. It's about all the wrongs that we do to one another, even when we love one another, and the various bonds between human beings. Yeah, I think that's a good description. I have a couple, I think, videos on Catalin Street as well. The next one is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This is the one whose chronology is not quite so simple. The official pub date for it in its uncensored version is in the 70s, but it was written starting in the 1920s. So it had a vast and painful coming into the world. This is another huge, huge classic of 20th century literature. I've not made things easy for myself picking these kind of weird esoteric works, but in short, this is about the devil coming to the Soviet Union, basically, and the interaction between atheism and Christian morality, but then various layers of what is evil and what is good. Spoiler alert, it's not quite as simple, obviously, as the devil being evil. It's very much a satire of Soviet society. It's weird. Slight spoiler alert, it does not exclusively take place in 20th century Russia. I'm not going to tell you where else it takes place, but that's another one that I read when I was at a very formative age, and that really marked me. In general, these books are, I think, all falling into one of two categories, which is books I read in the past couple of years, or books that I read between ages maybe 16 to 19. So there's kind of, I think, recentness bias on the one hand and formation bias on the other. Next up is Sula by Toni Morrison. This is another one where I just couldn't really pick which Toni Morrison I wanted as one of my favorite books of all time. I love Toni Morrison. I've read a number of her books, and all the ones that I've read are bangers. They are all just fucking good. I picked Sula because it, again, actually in the formative side of the world, it's one that I read early. I read Beloved and Sula when I was a teenager, and they really, really struck me. I reread them last year, or the year before? No, last year. And they struck me again. Sula is quite short. It is about two girls who grow up to be women, and the ways in which their lives completely diverge from one another. And that's actually kind of another through line of some of these books is how people's experiences diverge. We saw this in Catalin Street. You're gonna see it in another one of my picks as well. So Sula and Nell are really, really, really close when they are girls. They undergo a monumental experience together that continues to solder them together. But as they age, they completely diverge in paths. Sula is kind of reviled by their community as being this witchy, wild woman, and Nell is a pillar of the community. And through their experiences and the ways in which their lives diverge and then reconnect, you get, again, a long chronology of an African-American town and a vast array of characters, the experience of womanhood in several different ways. It's funny and sad, like most of Morrison's things, which she writes so gorgeously. And so there's always these moments that are like really, really sharp and funny and poignant and delicious, but at the same time, she has these narratives that can be so heartbreaking. And that's good. That's a good description of that. Next up, A Breath of Life, or Pulsations by Clarice Lispector. I have talked about this book so damn much in the past few weeks because I have been reading it. I just finished it a few days ago. And this is yet another one where it's kind of standing in for all of Lispector's works that I have read. I have so far liked to loved everything by Lispector that I have read, and all of it is relatively similar. I have not yet read The Passion According to G.H., which is a huge classic, and I suspect once I do finally read it, it might overtake A Breath of Life as my fave. But I don't know, we'll see. I'll check in with that. This is certainly one that has really hit me. There's not that much narrative to it. It's about an author who writes a character named Angela, who gives life to a character and has conversations with her and brings her into being and watches as she lives her life and dies. There's something really special about specifically this book that's quasi-magical, mystical, because it was published posthumously. So it mirrors so much Lispector's own life, like so many of her books do, because the obsession with how to create self and other and words and thought and how to swim through that giant nebulous void of the universe in order to eke out a line of semi-understandable being is such a through line in her work, is such an important part of what she's writing about in all of the books of hers that I've read. But this is the most overtly so, because she is writing about being a writer, although she's writing about a male writer, which is another recurrent theme, and just how he gives life to a human being. What is life? What is living? Just heady, beautiful thoughts that get me just completely ratchet it up. So I picked this one because it's the most recent one I finished. It's, of the ones that I have read, the one that has stuck with me the most and seems the most magical. But honestly, it kind of stands in for all of Clarice Lispector. Next up is Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid, which I only read at the end of last year and really, really fell in love with. It's a really short book, and it's a coming-of-age novel of Lucy. She is a Caribbean young woman. I don't know if she's actually from Antigua in the way, I can't remember, in the way that Jamaica Kincaid is, but she goes to New York. She is working for a white family. She has many pithy thoughts and also many realizations about what it means to be a maturing person. She is already so flinty and steeled and self-possessed at the beginning of the novel. She comes so young, but already so predisposed to understanding the world and understanding the iniquities of the world and being able to kind of see through people's bullshit. But at the same time, she is naive or innocent in other ways, and especially in sentimental ways. So this is really about the expansion of her concept of relations to other people and love, her relationship to her home country and her specific home and to her mother, and then also to the people that she meets as a young adult, and her relationship to love and to relationships, to needing other people, to being independent and yet also needing other people. So it's just a delicious pleasure of a book that covers so much in so few pages. Next up is White Teeth by Zadie Smith. Yet again, this is me choosing one example to sort of stand in for all of the other books of hers that I have read, and I've read a good percentage of her books. I really like her as a writer. This is also the first book of hers that I did read. I've talked about this on this channel before, but it was, when I was a teenager, really an initiating spark for me to discover contemporary literature, because up to then I had enjoyed reading a lot, but I really had only ever read literature, classic literature, maybe from like the 40s or 50s. And this was my first dive into more recent literature. This is about, it starts from a relationship between two war buddies, two veterans, Samad and Archie. Samad is Bangladeshi, Archie is a white Englishman, and they meet during the war. They remain connected by that experience, and in the ensuing decades, they start their families. And their children remain tied together and have various relationships to one another. So this is much like Catalin Street and Sula, the ways in which paths come together and diverge. It is very much, as with so many of Smith's other stories, books, about belongingness, insiderness, outsiderness. It's about the changing face of London specifically, but Englishness, because it is about whiteness and non-whiteness. Archie marries a much younger Jamaican, I believe, woman, and so the daughter that they have is biracial, and it's about generational evolution or devolution, what parents want for their children, what children want for themselves. And I remember it being such an interesting cast of characters, an interesting portrayal of families and extended families, the kind of neighborhoods, but also, what was I gonna say? Oh, a really interesting puzzle. I really like the way it ends. I like the way that Zadie Smith assembles all of this patchwork and then finally at the end puts it all together. I know that I had the metaphor both of the puzzle and the patchwork. They fit together. So I remember being just really wowed when I read this. I think I was 16 or 17, by how broad of a scope she was representing and just how many juncture points she was managing between all of these elements. And finally, another Smith, Ali Smith with How to Be Both. You've heard it before, and I'll say it one last time. This is standing in for my love of Ali Smith in general. It's the first book of hers that I read. It is also about diverging and converging storyline. These, however, are two vastly, vastly different storylines. And in fact, the book can be read with the first half here or the first half here. It doesn't, because it is following two young people, the lives of two young people, one a contemporary British girl, the other a Renaissance Italian apprentice. And you can read one story first or the other story first, and they are quite separate from one another, but again, much as in Zadie Smith's tying together of things, and actually basically everybody else's tying together of all of these loose ends, they are in this really, really beautiful communication with one another. As with other books that I have mentioned, there is a relationship to time and space and the presence relationship to the past, and even the past relationships to the future or something. It's a story about grief and grieving and culture. And if you know any of Ali Smith's books, you know that she's extremely referential. She loves language, she loves culture, and she loves referencing culture. And it is for her a part of not just her narrative construction, but it is part of the way that characters relate to one another. And in this case, it's a really, really overt theme in which love for another person is represented through the culture that you share with that other person. And even if one of those people is dead. So it's a sharing through time and how love manifests and is held in the cultural objects that we hold dear and that make us, and how much we also impart into cultural objects, not just that we create as artists, but also that we help to create as admirers of the artwork. So this reciprocity that I find absolutely magnificent. Okay, I think I did a great job. We'll see in the editing. Thank you for watching. Let me know if these are books that you also adore. Let me know if these are books that you revile. Let's get, some drama, some tension going in the comments. We'll see how much I keep true to these researched but imperfect and slightly aleatoric decisions of my top 10. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.